Welcome everybody to the Wake Up Call channel. Today I just wanted to do a video and talk about how this entire world is a lie. And it's really the mindset that everybody should be in. There's people who think they're awake, there are people who are awake, and then there are people who are actively trying to stay awake throughout the day, like myself, so that we don't fall for any of the propaganda that we see. So we deal with people, like I've said before, who look at the news and think that certain stories are fake when it comes to political adversaries, right? We see conservatives think that CNN is fake, etc., and they say it's all fake news, that stuff. But then when they roll out stories about war and these other things, we're supposed to believe that it's real. Now, let's look at a few Bible verses to understand the news and who creates the news. And the news is what? Of this world, is it not? What do they call the news? They call it world news, right? But if you didn't have a television and you didn't have a phone, you wouldn't know that any of this stuff was ever going on. You wouldn't know what was going on over in Israel. You wouldn't know what was going on one state over. You would have no clue unless you actually knew somebody from another state, had a family member who came and told you and said, oh, we had a tornado that went through. Oh, okay. But you wouldn't know about any of this other nonsense without the media. And Satan uses the media as his weapon to deceive the masses. Now, Christians need to realize when the Bible's talking about Satan and it's talking about him being a liar, think to yourself, what is the Bible telling us that Satan is lying about? How would Satan have control over your mind as a Christian unless you were getting information from Satan directly? If you blocked all this crap out, you would never know about any of it. If you stayed in the Word and you stayed away from the TV and the news, you would have no clue. But Satan is the father of lies, right? In John chapter 8, verse 44, you are of your father the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies, right? So Satan is the father of lies. So think to yourself, well, what is God telling me when he says Satan is the father of lies? I don't know of Satan. I don't know him. He doesn't knock on my front door every day. No, he does actually knock on your door every day. Because who do you think controls the media? Now, don't forget these other two verses from the Bible. In Revelation chapter 12, verse 9, and the great dragon was thrown down, the ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. In 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8, be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. So ask yourself, how is Satan? How is the devil? How is he deceiving the world? Would the world know of any of these things without the means of television and media? No, they wouldn't. And the Bible specifically tells us this in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 2. Wherein in times past ye walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience. The power of the air, the airwaves, right? Bluetooth, frequencies, the airwaves, all of this information comes into us through the air. Who is the prince of the power of the air? Satan is the prince of the power of the air. And he's deceiving the world by getting them to live in a world that doesn't even exist. The reality that they're creating is simulated, it's formulated, it's fictional. But we think of it as our day-to-day lives. The things happening on the box, on the internet, instead of our day-to-day lives that are happening in our homes. Most people, oh, it's a crazy world out there. Crazy this, crazy that, because they're affected by this. They're influenced by it, right? They're influenced by the world. And God tells us specifically in 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17. Listen, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, and the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world passeth away, and the lust thereof, but he that doeth the will of God abideth forever. So we've established that Satan is a liar. We've established that Satan deceives, right? But we never ask ourselves, how does Satan lie and deceive me, right? If you're a Christian and you're in the Word, how does he lie and deceive you? Well, think if he has control over your perception of what's going on, right? He is of this world, even though God created this world. Now, when you think about the television, what nobody ever thinks of is that they're not watching it freely thinking. They don't know how brain waves work. Beta brain waves, alpha, delta, theta, gamma, brain waves, right? Most people are watching television in a alpha or delta brainwave, but it could even be lower than that with many. So in other words, an alpha brainwave, physically and mentally relaxed, awake but drowsy. But a delta wavelength, deep sleep, loss of bodily awareness, right? So you're watching this stuff, but you're not critically thinking. You're not assessing what they're telling you. Most people out there are watching it, and when people like us who are watching it in a beta state, right, a beta wave, we're watching it awake, alert, like as if we were doing something where you had to be alert. But when you naturally go in front of the TV, your brainwave reduces and you go down into a state where you could be put under hypnosis, where you could be put into a trance. That's where they feed you the information of lies. That's where they start telling you that this is what's happening in the world, and your brain is being programmed into this false perception of reality, this false illusion of what's going on when it's not what's really going on. Now, if you're watching the news, if you're watching media in a beta state, which I'm assuming a lot of people are listening to this in a beta state based on the fact that I'm speaking passionately, because that helps pull people out. And this isn't an act, this is how I speak normally. If you're watching it in a beta state, then you can start seeing the news for what it is. You start saying, oh, look what they're doing here. Look what they're doing there. Oh, look at this guy. Look at this bad actor. Because you start seeing this stuff. And that's why they're so hell-bent on silencing people like us, because when we point out the events that they stage, it's very easy to see the acting. It's very easy to see the duping delight when you're in a beta state, because you're watching it wide awake. And you say, well, this doesn't make sense. That doesn't connect the dot here. This guy's laughing over there. His kid just got killed. What's going on? You realize, wow, this is really formulated. This is like watching a C-level horror film, or a D-level horror film, I should say, or an F-level. But most people are in such a trance. Their brainwaves are so low when they're watching their media and they're getting fed their media that they don't realize that they're being programmed. And that's all that it is. That's all that it is. And Christians out there specifically are giving blind obedience to the television set. When God warns us about Satan, God tells us so many times in the Bible, so many times that he's a liar. The father of lies, specifically in John chapter 8, verse 44, which I read earlier. The deceiver of the whole world, he's referred to as. He's prowling around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Now, who is he looking to devour? Well, everyone. Everyone. So if Satan is looking to devour, what do people think that this means? Do they mean that he's sitting in their lawn with a plate with a fork and a knife? Well, I mean, sure. I'm sure in some cases he is. But he's looking to prowl on you, on your mind. He's deceiving you and lying you by creating a false perception of reality. Don't ever forget the verse that I read from Ephesians. The prince of the power of the air. Go to a church and ask them to explain it to you. They don't. They won't. They'll say it's a metaphor. They'll say the things that I'm saying are a lie because they can't get away from the world, most preachers. Most churches cannot get away from the world because they're influenced by the news. They're influenced by these stories. You could see behavioral control and how people act and behave differently today than they did 20 years ago. How people dress a certain way. How every preacher talks the same, even if they aren't a government operative and they're just a church leader. They dress and talk the same because that's how behavioral control works through influence in media. That's why all these guys look cookie cutter. That's why they all talk the same. All these churches follow the same formats. The government created those formats and then everybody followed suit and they followed in line. And they told you, don't listen to people like this guy who's raising his voice because that doesn't fit in with what we want Christianity to be, which is lukewarm. That way, God will spit those people out, and that's what they want at the end of the day. So most preachers will even speak about the news in church, And they'll bring up Israel. They'll bring up all these stories of conflict. But nobody out there says, was this manufactured news? It's all manufactured news. The prince of the power of the air is the one feeding you the information. And his minions are the ones giving it to you under the guise of saying that they're journalists, under the guise of telling you that they're giving you actual news. Here's the real news. The news itself is fake. It creates a false perception of reality. It creates a false sentiment on what is going on. So if we can get Christians specifically to start seeing this, we can get them out of bed with, number one, the synagogue of Satan himself. Because I was just talking to somebody about that. We all know who the synagogue of Satan is, right? They claim to be one thing, but they're not. They claim to be this certain group of people, but they're not, right? Most Christians will ignore that verse because they don't want to think that they're getting deceived. And most churches will not read the book of Revelation. They call that end time prophecy. They don't like to talk about that because they think people like us are trying to predict what's going on. But it's all going on according to prophecy. It's all unfolding right in front of our faces on a day in, day out basis, and everybody could see it, as in the days of Noah. All of this information that you're getting is coming directly from the synagogue of Satan itself. Look at who owns and controls the media. Look at Larry Fink. Look at the last names of these people who give you your information. All of them claim to be of a certain group, a certain faith, a certain bloodline, but they're not from the bloodline they claim to be. They're from a different one, Ashkenazi. Oh, excuse me. Kesar. Whoop, sorry. Frog in my throat. So everybody out there is getting their information on what they think is really going on from the devil himself directly, the synagogue of Satan directly. And my biggest fear right now with the way and what is happening in the world, the way the world's going, is watching Christians be deceived by the devil himself. And we could all look at it and say, well, that's their fault. But it's not necessarily their fault because they were thrown into this mess. We were all born into this. A lot of us were born into this, pushed into the school system, pushed through college, told that that's what we're supposed to do, still feeling like something's off, and then finally figuring it out. We all got thrown into this mess. But God gave us a blueprint to get out of this mess, and it's called the Bible. And we use that to navigate ourselves out, to realize that there's lies, that Satan's the father of lies. And then you start asking yourself, well, if Satan's the father of lies, what lies is he feeding to me? Right? What lies is he feeding to you? Is he showing up at your door at night saying, hey, come here, I'm cool, come hang out with me? Is that No, the lies that he's feeding to you are all the things that you think are going on and who you're supposed to be nice to and care about and protect. Because really, at the end of the day, everybody out there is serving as a safeguard for the synagogue of Satan themselves. So now we have all these Christians out there who will not question if the news is fake. You tell them this type of stuff and they go, that's ridiculous. You know why they do that? And part of the reason why is because when they watch their local news, there's stories mixed in about a crime that happens up the road or an event in their town. That's done by design. That's why they still have local news. Otherwise, they would just get rid of it and have national news. It gives you trust to think that the news is actually really what's going on. So, of course, in the local news, if somebody gets murdered in your town, you're going to hear about it. Or if something's happening at a local town event, that's why the news still goes out of their way. It looks so corny, right? And they show you some like parade or event that happens in your town. Because without you realizing it, psychologically on a conscious level or an unconscious level, right? You're being told that this is what's going on in your town. This is the news. And you don't even realize that that's why they're showing you those things so that you think that it's a real perception of what's going on. Because you're like, oh yeah, I was at that parade they just showed. So how can you tell me that the news is fake? Right? Then right after that story, they go back into what's going on in Israel or what's going on in Ukraine or what's going on with Trump and Biden. Boom, 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 boom. Right? So your perception is, oh, how could somebody say the news is fake? How could somebody ever say that? Right? When you say, well, who owns all the corporations? Who owns all of the news, all of the media? One specific group that you can't question, that you're not allowed to say anything about, right? You can't say a word about it. If you do, it's anti-you-know-what. Hate speech. Why do you think that they're protected? Shouldn't you question the people you're not allowed to question? I mean, that should be basic, just how people think, right? If you saw somebody, attacking an elderly person, you went over to help and they said, no, let them do it. They're allowed to. Wouldn't you say, why is he allowed to do that? What? That doesn't make sense. That's how we should all look at it. Why can't you question these people when you can question those people? Well, they've gone through a lot. oh, they've gone through it, because they don't want you to figure it out, because throughout history, people have figured it out. They figured out who they are, who they claim to be, and then they watch them meddle in everybody's lives every single day. And they said, all right, I've had enough of this. Let's do something about it. And that's the point we're reaching. That's why it's so important now to have some of these bills that I recently covered passed, because it keeps them protected, especially now, right? Have them in conflict, right? So that people feel sympathy for them. And then, of course, why not get the people who are supposed to be at war, this spiritual war with the devil himself, in bed with the devil? And that's what they've done. So the news itself is fake. It's scripted. And it gives you this perception. The Bible, that's what I believe all these verses are about. Not specifically the television, the media, but the lies and the people who give the lies. Now it's known as TV, radio, newspaper, cell phone, whatever media you're getting it from. Not this media, but every other media out there. The ones that don't get silenced, the ones that they allow to flourish, are the ones who are continuing to keep you in the lie they want to keep you inside of. And all of this stuff, all of these deceptions, they all go back to the father of lies himself, Satan. I thank everybody for being here. Hope you're all doing well. God bless you as always and your families.